Gigabyte may very well be one of the leading parts manufacturers in the PC world, but that doesn't mean that its ambitions don't transcend beyond the dying industry. The 5-inch GSmart Alto A2 is just one of several new Gigabyte entrants, yet the road ahead is anything but easy, especially now that competition in the lower end has ramped up considerably. This is Chris with PhoneArena, and I'll help you find out just how much of a bang for your buck you can expect from the Alto A2. You could stare at the GSmart Alto A2 for as long as you want, yet you won't figure out just which device the phone resembles most. That's because it's strictly generic looking, as has become typical for Androids in this price range. In all honesty, however, we sometimes much prefer for manufacturers to stick to the well-beaten path instead of chasing smoke. So, is the Alto A2 as boring as we're making it out to be? Kind of, but not exactly, because it has a few aces up its sleeve. For example, it's relatively slim at 9.3mm, and though that doesn't sound too impressive on paper, the device actually looks kind of slender. Gigabyte have also thrown in an interchangeable white backplate into the mix, and the device doesn't look bad in black and white. It's also worth pointing out that the Alto A2 may not be everybody's cup of tea, as it's actually quite large, so much so that it easily towers above other 5 inchers like the Galaxy S4 and is actually on the heavy side with its 175 grams. In terms of build, this appears to be a well put together device. The usual plastic construction is in place, of course, with the back touting a grip-friendly matte finish, a camera unit that protrudes just a tad too much, and a mono-speaker grille. As far as hardware buttons go, the device has just two, a volume rocker on the right and a power button on the left. Both of these actually provide just the right amount of feedback, so no complaints there. With a 5-inch TFT display, the Alto A2 belongs to the crop of big-sized phones. Unfortunately, its 480 by 854 resolution screen has been a total letdown from the moment we picked it up. And it's not just about the low pixel density. In fact, if that was its only disadvantage, we'd actually go ahead and give it a pass, but that's simply not the case. For starters, the display has a clearly perceptible cyan tint to it, and it really is one of the worst we've seen. What makes matters worse, however, is the absolutely horrible viewing angles, both vertical and horizontal. Said otherwise, even minimal changes in your point of view will have a detrimental effect on how you see the screen. It's so bad really that you could be keeping a perfectly stable angle and still notice discrepancies in the quality between the top and bottom parts of the display. So, in a nutshell, the display on this phone is by far the most disappointing part of the package. As far as the software goes, the stock Android experience on the Alto A2 sure allows us to take a break from all the negativity around the display. The UI runs smoothly for the most part, though if you take a closer look, you can still notice some minimal slowing down every now and then. And while this is a vanilla Android, Gigabyte has actually added its own touch by tweaking what's in the quick toggles area and on the home screen. The second houses 4 separate widgets, one for the time and date, another with a few quick toggles like Wi-Fi and brightness, and 2 others for internet tethering and access to the dual SIM manager. Luckily, all of these are as minimalistic as they get, and the company hasn't gone overboard like some of its rivals. The hardware on Gigabyte's device is perfectly capable, especially for its class. However, some of you might be a little puzzled as to why the UI would occasionally slow down. This is most likely due to a combination of things, but do keep in mind that the phone sports a 1.3 GHz MediaTek 6572 chipset. This chip is built on a 28nm process and it has gone through some improvements overall. Namely, while last year's dual cores from MediaTek run on a sluggish power VR GPU, the new generation now touts a slightly more respectable Mali 400. This ensures a mostly smooth gameplay in the low to mid tier of gaming titles, though these are rendered with less fluff than your typical flagship. Looking at the memory department, we could say that the situation is pretty much on par. You get 1GB of RAM, but the 4GB of native storage are actually quite constrictive. This means that you likely have to make use of the microSD card slot found under the removable backplate. Browsing with the help of the MediaTek 6572 is not without its weaknesses, but it has been made easier and more of a pleasure. For example, and as is common with MediaTek chips, text and images only get rendered once you zoom in, but we honestly prefer this approach to waiting. Zooming and swiping can get a little taxing on the CPU, but the average smartphone user will likely never notice it. As for connectivity features, you get a middle-of-the-road pick with Bluetooth 3.0, Wi-Fi and GPS, and 3G speeds of up to 21 megabits. A 5-megapixel camera unit, complete with autofocus and LED flash, is what you'll find on the back of the Alto A2. And while we'll get to the weaknesses of the shooter in just a bit, it's worth pointing out that the snapper is actually a bit more capable than the average crop of 5-megapixel low ends. It produces accurate colors and manages to capture a decent amount of light, unlike many rival solutions. On the negative front, it has to be noted that details are on the lower end and photos can sometimes exhibit a bit too much softness and noise, both of which combined can overpower some shots. In terms of the camera interface, it doesn't deviate at all from the stock Android experience. HDR is available, and so is the option for panoramic shots, though both of these have actually been a mixed bag. So for example, while HDR shots were not too shabby, even minimal shaking would produce ghosting artifacts. After throwing half a dozen of different multimedia files at the Alto A2, we concluded that the capabilities of the phone out of the box are quite unimpressive. You get the stock music and video players, which work just fine for the most common set of tasks, but nothing more. If however you're looking for something a bit more functional and eye-pleasing, a trip to the Play Store is pretty much guaranteed. The chipset inside does manage to render even videos with a fancier encoding like MKV, but unfortunately playing 1080p clips will cause the video to lag behind sound massively, and this will actually get the Alto A2 dangerously close to crashing entirely. Somewhat more worrying, however, is the fact that this appears to be a problem with the drivers of the new chips, as other video players we picked from the App Store failed just the same. Until this point, and with the exception of the display of course, the Alto A2 actually proved to be just a notch above the flock of lower-end devices. But when it came to call quality, things really went downhill. And while the microphone is of passable quality, the earpiece is just downright bad. This means that the other side will hear you just fine, but you may have trouble identifying just who that stranger is, as the sound is both muffled and just not up to standard. In other words, if you play upwards of a few calls a day, we'd seriously recommend you test this aspect of the phone before you invest. So far we've covered just about every aspect of the Alto A2, but we haven't forgotten about the 2000 mAh cell inside. That one manages to keep the phone afloat just long enough for you to get done with your day, but it's unlikely to muster enough willpower to go through a second. Things get especially problematic if you have to crank up the brightness, so take a moderate approach. In conclusion, we can say that MediaTek's ultra low-cost chips have finally matured to prove capable enough to handle the needs of users shooting for a low-end smartphone. And by the way, a stock Android experience is certainly nothing to sneeze at. Just these two would have actually made the GSmart Alto A2 a phone worth your serious consideration, was it not for this seriously underwhelming display and disappointing call quality. In fact, these are both so problematic that they overshadow just about every other issue one might have with the phone. The other problem with obscure devices like the Alto A2 is that both availability and pricing can be quite inconsistent depending on where it is you call home. A quick search of ours actually brought back a rather compelling price tag for the dual SIM Alto A2, which is about 180 bucks. So while this phone doesn't excel in any particular venue, it's still a decent deal so long as you can stomach the display and can get your hands on something like the Motorola Moto G. Once again, this was Chris with PhoneArena, thanks for watching.